Okay, welcome everybody. I think we'll get started here. My intro will be fairly quickly, but first of all, thank you so much for joining us today across multiple time zones. Welcome to our webinar on alcoholic beverages in the Japanese market. My name is Megan Horosco. I'm a Senior Trade Officer with Alberta's Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, and Rural Economic Development. I'm also very happy to have my colleague, Mary Beth Takao, on the line today, who is our Senior Trade and Investment Officer in the Alberta, Japan office based in Tokyo. We are very excited for our speakers and panelists today, but before I pass the presentation over to them, I'd like to do a quick introduction of our team and services. Next slide, please. I work in the Export Development Unit of Alberta Agriculture, Forestry, and Rural Economic Development. Our focus is to work with Alberta food and beverage companies in market development, ultimately expanding exports abroad. Next slide. We do this in a number of ways, which include export readiness and market development initiatives targeted for Alberta companies, such as this educational webinar today that you're joining us. We also work very closely with partners in the federal government through the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service, as well as Global Affairs Canada Regional Office, as well as other partner organizations to help tap into expertise and connections to help companies prepare for and enter international markets. Next slide. We have a fairly small team at this time. I know many of you on the call are familiar with members of our team because we've worked with us before. And we probably will be growing again soon with some vacancies that are going to be filled. But we do cover many subsectors in the agriculture and agri-food sector, assigned by geographic basis. That being said, since today's webinar is focused on the Japanese market, please reach out to me as a point of contact for any questions about this market. Next slide. The government of Alberta maintains international presence around the world. We have a number of international offices and that are noted here on the slide. Locations that we have agri-food dedicated staff include Japan, South Korea, China, India, United States, and Mexico. And we are planning to add officers in Singapore and Europe as well. In Japan, I'm very happy to say my colleague Mary Beth works exclusively with the agriculture and agri-food file. We have a few Japan facts up on the slide, but I also want to tell you that our office in Japan is actually Alberta's flagship international office, and it celebrated its 50th year of representation in the market in 2020. The office supports international buyer missions, trade shows, business-to-business introductions, as well as research, and works closely with us here in Alberta to help Alberta companies reach their goals in Japan. I'd also like to share that we have a number of previous webinars that you may find helpful. Today's webinar follows up on a general export readiness webinar for alcoholic beverage companies. And our team also delivered a webinar on entering the US market last month. I know that many of you tuned into these webinars, but I do welcome you to visit them if you missed them or if you'd like to review the information. Also, if you are new to exporting and have general questions after today's webinar, I highly encourage you to visit the playlists and look through some of the videos because they may answer a lot of questions about preparing to export. These are all uploaded on a YouTube playlist, and as soon as I'm finished speaking, I will share the link in the chat box so you can bookmark it. Now, I want to leave as much time as possible for our panelists, so I'm going to stop here. Please feel free to connect with me for any inquiries on the markets I cover, or if you have additional questions after this webinar. And now it's my absolute pleasure to hand things over to Paulina with Gourmet Pro to introduce our speakers and lead the rest of today's webinar. Thank you, Paulina, and over to you for the main course of today's presentation.
Thank you so much, Megan. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today at our webinar of Ready, Set, Export. We are extremely glad to welcome you and have a great presentation and a lot of interesting panelists for you and get introduced more details about the Alberta spirits and craft beer opportunities in the Japanese market. But before we kick it off, I'd like to shortly go through today's outline so you have a better understanding what we've prepared for you today. And we're going to start with small introductions about our organizers. And our first part of the webinar is going to be focused on a presentation about the distribution landscape in Japan. This is extremely interesting from our side to do for you because we believe you're going to learn very interesting facts about the Japanese market, and you're going to find out that Japanese distribution is quite different from what you've experienced until now on other international markets. The second part is going to be focused on the panel discussion. And we have invited very special guests with very extensive and interesting backgrounds that are going to share more about the Japanese market, as well as share their valuable experience with you. And also in the end of the webinar, you're going to have about 30 minutes for a Q&A. So please make full use of it and ask your questions in the chat box. Just also wanted to share with you that today's webinar will be recorded, so you can also access it or share with your colleagues after we finish today. And also to start with today's organizers, small introduction. We are very, very glad to be collaborating with Alberta's office here in Japan with Mary Beth, and special thanks also to Megan for their support around the whole organization. And to quickly share a little bit more about us, we are Gourmet Pro. We are based in Japan, and we are an exclusive network of freelance consultants. And we support businesses with their operations to Japan and also in Japan. So of course, if you have any questions or would like to further connect with us, we'll be very glad to do so after the webinar. From our side, we are going to be 2 people. So this is my colleague Vincent Nicol, and he'll be presenting shortly. He's our co-founder and also Chief Strategy Officer. And I'll be today's moderator. My name is Paulina, and I'm the Customer Experience Manager at Gourmet Pro. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Vincent, who will be presenting about the Japan's beer and spirits distribution landscape in Japan. Welcome, Vincent.
Thank you, Paulina. Thanks everyone for joining us. We are extremely happy to be with you for this first webinar all together. My name is Vincent Nicol. I'm the co-founder and the Chief Strategy Officer at Gourmet Pro. And I'm also a beverage expert with experience in working and supporting different types of companies, very large global players, family-owned businesses, startups, as well as Japanese importers across not all, but most of the categories we are going to cover today: spirits, craft beers, cider, and ready to drink. I also have the pleasure to be the presenter today. So I'm going to walk you through the Japanese distribution with basically like 4 topics. We will start from the overview of the Japanese distribution universe in terms of both the on-trade and the off-trade. We are then going to give you a sense of how does it work, in terms of structure, from the importers through the different intermediates layers until the end users. I'm going also to give you a few ideas of how does it work in terms of value chain, in terms of price structure, with detailed information on the difference, cost and margin. And then I'm going to introduce you at the end what are the potential importers that you may try to work with in terms of both the importers categories, and also like share with you the name of a few importers. So let's move to the first part, which is the universe. So let's start from the on-trade. I think like depending on your brands, both of course off-trade, on-trade might be relevant. Here we just selected the most relevant channels for the spirits and the beer. Of course, the Japanese food service, like in terms of Japanese food, the channels are very broad across, the Japanese noodles, the sushi, yakitori, yakiniku. There are also lots of Asian food, European food, etc. So I'm not going to go into too much detail when it's come to the dining and the restaurants, but this is basically the overview of the distribution. So we have here the karaoke rooms. I think like you are all familiar that the karaoke is a big piece of the Japanese nightlife culture. Actually, this is a quite difficult channel to approach. I think the channel is mostly relevant for mainstream brands, very established brands. And I see few opportunities for like the premium and the craft beer or spirits brands at first. I think like one of the big opportunities probably with the other channel which are in these slides. The bar and pub here, like 26,000 venue. We're talking here about more like casual places, typically the kind of place where the young people will gather. Could be shot bars, could be dining bars. There are lots of different bars here. The repertory in terms of spirits and beer is not that large. I think you understand that most of these bars are quite small in Japan, especially in large urban areas, so that they will tend to go to choose like mostly, again, mainstream brands. But depending on your category, especially if you think about the whiskey, for example, or gin, when you tap into this kind of rather large, categories, there is definitely a big opportunity here. Most of the bars are independent. There is only a few number of bar chains, which are mostly Hub, which is a pub with more than 100 venues, and also a few chains like Hibiya Bar, who specialize more in whiskey. Then the cocktail bars, 2,000 venues. Here we are talking about the sophisticated cocktail bars. I think like you all know that the Japanese cocktail bar world is extremely sophisticated. What is interesting here, especially I think like for the companies willing to export spirits, is that most of the bartenders will love to give a try to new spirits. They are obviously rather picky and conservative when it's come to replacing their favorite bottles, with new products. But typically, those bartenders will attend seminars, tasting event. They will read the specialized media, etc. Lots of them are also on Instagram checking, what is happening in the other market. So this is definitely a very interesting channel to approach through the specialized importers. The dining and restaurant here is, again, it's a very big universe from very high-end place to the fast food. What is interesting here probably for the Alberta companies could be Western restaurants, steakhouse, sophisticated also American dining. It could be a little bit difficult to approach in a strategic way because, again, this is very fragmented. Most of the venue will be like independent place rather than chains, but this is also a channel that will be approached through the importers and through the bar suppliers that I'm going to introduce after. The craft beer pubs are definitely the obvious channel for the craft beer. Here, just be aware that most of these venues will probably prioritize domestic craft beers, and the imported craft beers repertory can be sometimes a little bit limited. What is interesting here is that they all have guest beers, seasonal beers on their menu all the time. So clearly there is also an opportunity to do like a kind of test market. Why not with this kind of place? Some of the pubs are independent. Some of the pubs are part of small chains with a few venues. Then the bar festival, of course, we're talking about like purely the beer festival. We're talking about like events. What is good here in terms of approach is to basically work together with the craft beer pub that could be also attending a beer festival. And again, this is a very good way to launch a product to do a test market in Japan. Then the hotel lounge, again, this is related to the cocktail bars. Here, it could be a little bit difficult if you don't have agreement with large hotel companies to enter this channel, obviously. But this is definitely, a key channel once the brand is established in the market. And then we put here the e-commerce in this slide because actually there are lots of stores, shops, online shops, which are operated by bar suppliers, and sometimes also by the chains themselves. Since 2 years with the COVID situation, some of the chains that I mentioned, for example, Hub, start to sell also online. So this is definitely a channel also to watch. So next slide, yes. So here we have all the off-trade channels. Just be aware that the distribution here is extremely fragmented. There are like literally hundreds of different chains. So it's not like there is not like kind of, I don't know for Alberta, but in lots of markets, there is you know, 1, 2, 3 large retailers, basically with a very high market share. This is not really the case in Japan. There are lots of different chains, lots of also independent players, especially when it's come to the liquor shop. So on the left side, you have like the GMS. Of course, you know, here it's a key channel. I'm talking about like very large supermarkets, operated often by Aeon, which is the #1 retailer in Japan, by Ito-Yokado and a few other retailers. I think here it's not probably, it should not be the priority at first when you enter the market. It's quite difficult to list products that are not established in the market. But again, as a second step, this is definitely a key channel. International supermarkets, we're talking here about like, you know, this kind of place where the Japanese people are buying international food. Here, an advice is to work with Seijoishi, which is the #1 chain in this channel with almost 200 stores. Seijoishi is really interested in ciders, craft beer, even ready to drink, and could be also a partner in Japan because they are importing indirect through their own import division. Department stores used to be a key channel for the spirits. I think this is less the case at the moment. It has been a declining channel, and I don't think this should be a priority for you. Then the liquor shop. There are lots of stores. You can see the number. I feel like there are liquor shops everywhere in Japan, but actually most of these places are very local, mostly selling Japanese whiskey, Japanese sake, domestic whiskey, domestic beers, and with a limited numbers of imported brands. So here, what is clearly the most interesting in terms of liquor stores are two leading chains. One is Yamaya, which is the #1 chain with more than 300 stores in Japan, and Liquor Mountain, which is the second largest chain. Both Yamaya and Liquor Mountains are also importing indirect, and I'm going to introduce this after. Discount stores, I think here like there are lots of different chains. One interesting chain is Don Quijote, which is very strong when it's come to, let's say, spirits brand, appealing to young generation, what we call in Japan, you know, the party drinks. Here there is an opportunity. With the other discount store, I think it's a little bit more difficult because they have a focus on, again, mainstream and very established brands. And then the e-commerce, here it could be like a whole different, you know, webinar. It's quite complex because there are lots of different companies, you know, operating different online stores. What is an opportunity for especially the spirits brand, I think, is to work with the bar supplier that I just mentioned. They are like both very local bar suppliers working with across all the categories, and they are also very specialized bar suppliers who are working basically in this niche cocktail bars distribution, as Musashiya, for example. And they all have dedicated websites, which are not sometimes very fancy, actually, but the place where the spirits, the whiskey lovers will, the shops where the whiskey lovers are also shopping online. And then the other channels are convenience store everywhere in Japan, and then the supermarket. Of course, you know, this is the #1 chain for all the alcoholic beverage, basically any alcoholic beverage company in Japan. But again, this is not going to be easy to approach as a first step. And this should be more part of an expansion strategy rather than a market entry strategy. The other chain here, I'm not going to explain this. I think like here there is a lower opportunity even in the long term. So here is an overview of how it works, you know, in terms of structure. So the importers basically are dividing in 4 categories. On the left side, you can see like top alcoholic beverage manufacturers. Here we are talking about Kirin, Asahi, Suntory, and Sapporo, which are the top 4 companies in Japan. They are obviously working with leading players. So to give an example, for example, Asahi is working with Brand Forman, with Proximo, with Brewdog, for example, Bols. Suntory is working with lots of different companies. Sapporo is partnering with Bacardi, for example. but they are not working with smaller players. They are usually reluctant also to new brands, and they will focus on basically like mainstream, very large brands. The other type of importers are the specialized importers. I think I'm going to describe this after, but clearly they could be your partner if you enter in Japan. The top wholesalers. So here it's interesting because some of the wholesalers are also importing indirect, specifically the 3 wholesalers that are indicated here: Kokubu, Nishuhan, and Sanyobusan. And then a few retailers are importing indirect. Here again, I was mentioning Seijoishi, for example, this upscale supermarket. They have their import division. Yamaya with Cordon Vert, and Liquor Mountain with an import division named Toko. The regular supermarkets are importing more and more indirect, but usually mostly like for wine categories and less for beers or spirits categories. And then these importers go through a first layer, which are the wholesalers. So here we're talking about very large companies. They have like net sales around like 10 billion US dollar, 20 billion US dollar. And basically they are handling all the distribution. The reason is, as I indicated, that the distribution is very fragmented. So these wholesalers are basically taking care of all the transaction and all the delivery from the importer to the retailer. And then the retailer are, you know, the type of channel that I just described. Here is the distribution structure in the on-trade. So again, you know, we're talking about the same importers. A difference is that you have on the right side a few like food service operators, which are also importing indirect, which is the case actually with a few craft beer pubs who are importing beer indirect. So talking about a very niche distribution, of course, this represents like probably less than 1% of the imported, you know, beer in Japan, but that could be also a way you enter the market, partnering with craft beer, for example, pub, which is also going to import the product. When it's come to the spirits, very few food service operators are importing indirect. Most of the import is going through the specialized importers here again. And the specialized importers are basically working through the bar suppliers, which are local players. They are like bar suppliers, basically for most of the companies. Most of the specialized importers are working with 100 to 300 different bar suppliers. And the bar suppliers, again, are taking care of everything, the delivery to the bars, doing also the announcement of the promotion, the new product launch, etc. This within the bar supplier, there are like large companies. Kakuyasu is the #1, Kawachiya, Nigita, and then there are also large bar suppliers in a specific region in Japan. For the beer, the craft beer business, some of the importers are also like shipping directly to the beer pub for especially the kegs, because the bar suppliers, you know, of course, the bar suppliers can handle the keg distribution, but sometimes they are not really strong at developing new brands, so that the importers are taking care of this indirect, especially with the one-way keg. And then the on-trade customer here are again the kind of channel that we described earlier. So let's move to the value chain. Yes, the price structure. So here what we wanted is really like to share actionable information so that you can also do your own equation. Of course, I was not aware of your FOB price. You know, you may have like very different pricing depending on the size of the company, your categories, etc., your positioning. So these are just assumptions when it's come to the FOB here and the retail price. So you can see on the left side, you know, the different items. Maybe let me start from the excise tax here. All the numbers, by the way, on this slide are per bottle. So the excise tax here, you can see that there are very big difference in between the excise tax applied to the beer the cider, which is very low, as well as the ready to drink, by the way, very low excise tax as well. The excise tax for spirits is basically based on the ABV. It's basically like in this case, if it's 40% ABV, it is going to be 400 yen per liter. And for the liquor, the tax is the excise tax is also the same. It's per ABV. Then in terms of tariff, the custom duties, you can see that for most of the categories, actually there is no more custom duties applying here. The import and distribution cost, this is average. I think you all understand that this is very different if you are shipping a pallet or a 40-feet container. So we just took some average. I think it's interesting to have this number in mind because when you build a price structure together with the importer, there will be probably lots of back and forth about the distribution costs in Japan. My understanding is that the distribution costs are very high in Japan, not only because of the distribution, but also of the labor cost in Japan. And obviously, as you all know, at the moment, the international freight is crazy expensive. So I try to reflect this kind of cost here. And basically, it's going to be very different if you are working with a large importer or very specialized importers. They have costs that can vary a lot depending on their distribution. Then the gross margin, it's quite consistent across all the categories and actually across all the importers. I will say like 30 to 40%, which is not on the land. It's not the gross margin after just the landing cost, but including all the domestic distribution cost as well. And then the wholesaler margin, this applies for the off-trade distribution. Here, like as I explained, we're talking about Kokubu and Nishuhan, these kind of large wholesalers. They are usually taking 12 to 15% margin, gross margin. The bar suppliers in the on-trade distribution structure are taking usually 20% margin. Then the retailers' margin is around 25 to 30%. Some of the upscale supermarket or the department stores are going to take like 35%, even 40% in some case, while the discount stores take usually like 20%, as well as the regular regional supermarket, especially for the mainstream categories. Happy to take also question at the end, on this price structure aspect, because I guess that this is also important also for you to have a sense of how you should position your product in the market. So here, we wanted to give you a sense of who could be your import partner in Japan. Again, as explained, there are different types of importers. I don't think, for the reason I mentioned that the large Suntory, Kirin, Asahi, Sapporo are going to be your partner, but there are opportunities with these three types of importers. The top wholesalers, I think, they might be interested in working with rather large companies. What is interesting is that they've been quite conservative in the past, like focusing on big brands, focusing on big categories. But now there is really a demand also from their own customers, this retailer chain also to increase, the repertory. And those wholesalers are also trying to import more like, let's say, more premium brands. Some of them have been starting also to import, for example, ready to drink, ciders categories as well. Those companies, basically, they are, for the reason I mentioned, very selective when it comes to their partner. It's quite difficult to start the conversation. They will expect you to have a dedicated export team, dedicated resource. They are price driven also because they are mostly focusing on the mainstream channels. And the big benefit of working with them is that they have a huge network. So if you think about companies like Kokubu, Nishuhan, they are basically selling all the alcoholic beverage in Japan. So they are literally everywhere, and they have also a very important sales force. For some of them, like 1,000, sales in the field. So that's obviously an ideal partner in terms of approaching the overall Japanese distribution. Then the specialized importer, I think like this could be your partner if you enter into the Japanese market. I will introduce right after a few companies. Here, most of the companies basically are family-owned businesses with, let's say, 10 to 30 people, a small import team, maybe like 5 to 10 salespeople. Most of these importers do not have like dedicated marketing resource. So there could be like a gap here in terms of expertise if you expect them to really like grow the brand, being the expert, you know, in terms of like trade marketing, for example, digital marketing, there might be some gaps. Their distribution also is limited. They usually work, have a focus on the on-trade with using the bar suppliers that I mentioned, 100 to 300 companies usually in terms of network. But they have a big passion for brands. And I think this is a very critical point. These importers, basically, they will start the conversation by really understanding who you are, what is your story, ask you lots of questions about the product, the manufacturing process, for example, the ingredients. And they could be obviously a huge advocate for your brands in Japan. And there will be also the people who will introduce your brands to these specialized, you know, bar suppliers, the bartenders, for example, the craft beer pub owners, etc. So this is probably the most obvious partner in Japan for this reason, especially if you think about rather premium craft categories. And then the direct import distribution is very interesting. I think the chain that I mentioned, Yamaya, Lika Mountain, Seijuishi, could be approached directly. They speak English. They are used to discuss with lots of companies. In a different context, they will be also visiting probably the international trade shows, etc. They are very well aware of the trends abroad. They are selective. They are picky. They are very price driven. They are retailers themselves. So sometimes, you know, a little bit tough when it's come to the price condition, for example. But the good news here is that as soon as they basically start a brand, they have their own distribution and they're going to push the brand. So it's very easy also in terms of equation to understand, you know, from the beginning what could be the sales potential and to build a plan with them in terms of also marketing support. So here I'm not going to describe, you know, all the specialized importers. What we wanted to do is basically give you a sense of, you know, who are these companies. Again, we're talking about rather small companies. Whiskey E, which is here, is maybe the exception because they have more resource, fully dedicated marketing teams. The other companies are either owned by foreigners, for example, which is the case of a few companies here. Sometimes they are owned by a larger company, which is more like a food trading company. Sometimes, you know, they started with one person, one brand, and now they are expanding their distribution and their portfolio in Japan. So different kind of companies, but basically what you can also here understand is that basically there are only a few numbers of companies. If you think about the wine business, for example, it's very different where there are like literally hundreds of importers. Here, I think like you can spend some time looking at the website, understand, you know, the kind of product they are dealing with, and then also contact them. For some of them, even directly, you know, on the website. The next slide also is introducing other players, which are more like specializing here on the spirits, the whiskey, for example. Again, they are typically the kind of importers that I described, passionate people, very well educated, very much into the details. So definitely, you know, an interesting partner for you. That's it for this presentation. Here we put some information about the brand, Canadian brand available in Japan. But I think we are going to discuss this also during the coming panel discussion. Thank you very much. I'm happy also to take some question at the end on the distribution if there is anything you want me to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vincent, for the wonderful presentation. I hope everybody could take the key insights from the Japanese distribution and get some inspirations and ideas of what your journey to the Japanese market would look like. Now I'd like to move to the second part of the webinar. Thank you so much, Vincent, for joining us, and I hope you can join us for the Q&A as well. Now I'd like to invite our two panelists, Yuki Saito and Kenta Matsuno. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see them both and start our discussion. Just a very short intro from my side. Yuki Saito has been working in the spirits and craft beer industry for quite some time, and he's been heading companies such as Molson Coors and Diageo, and has a very interesting marketing background in Kirin Holdings. And we have also Kenta Matsuno, who has been heading the Campari Japan team and helped the company start the operation and expand on the Japanese market. We believe both of them have very interesting and extensive background, and they will be sharing quite valuable tips for you. Also, make sure you ask us questions in the chat box so we can also engage in the discussion later on. So I'd like to welcome both Yuki Saito and Kenta Matsuno. Just a moment, please. Oh, sorry about that.
Paulina, can you see me?
Yes, thank you so
Okay.
much.
Okay, all right.
Good morning to both of you, and good afternoon to our attendees. So I'd just like to kick it off with our first questions and ask you, can you tell us a little bit more about your experience in the spirits and craft beer industry, so our attendees know a little bit more about your background? So maybe we can start with Saito-san.
Okay, all right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yuki Saito. I think I'm more into lower ABV alcohol beverage background rather than spirits. I have worked for beer, soft drink, non-alcohol, and RTD quite specifically, and then spirits company for close to 30 years in different companies in different geographies, mostly in Asia, Japan, China, Vietnam, Hong Kong, Taiwan, etc. So I'm happy to take any questions around mainly the beer, cider, and probably RTD, depending on your interest.
Thank you so much, Saito-san. And how about Matsuno-san?
Yes, thank you, Paulina, and good as everyone said, good afternoon to everyone. So my name is Kenta Matsuno. Based in Tokyo, and have worked with the spirits industry about 20 plus years and the first one I started with the brand managing of Jim Beam whiskey, and then I expanded my experience with the spirits and some wines and champagnes, and then previously moved for a Campari group. Opened up office in Japan and expanded to about 10-12 people, and then start working as a JV with the local partner for full operation. So my knowledge of building a team from scratch to doing a full operation might help someone's need. That'll be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the short introduction. And then I'd like to kick it off with our first question, going straight into the deep waters. So first of all, could you please share with us what are the common route to market mistakes international companies do when they enter the Japanese market? Also, please feel free to share some examples from your own experience. So maybe this time, Matsuno-san, could you please kick it off?
Yes, okay. So most of the time, it is, as Vincent explained, the Japanese route to market is pretty complex and complicated in a straight way. So understanding that complexity of route to market makes very difficult for foreign companies, and that can become the stress of the team outside of Japan. So that could be one example from me.
Do you maybe have some example from your own experience that you thought it's quite, let's say, surprising, or that could be useful as a learning point for our viewers?
Well, I can use some example from the market where one of the champagne brand from LVMH have tried to skip the like first, second layer of the market and selling directly to like supermarkets or liquor shop. But they failed. They tried a couple years and they failed and then they went back to the normal route to market to sell the product. So even the name of the brand is I don't mention here, but it's one of the most selling champagne in the world. Have tried, but they failed and they went back to the group. So it's tough.
Thank you so much for that advice. And indeed, the distribution here is quite difficult. There's also those hidden rules that people need to be aware of. And of course, following the route to market strategies would be a key element here. And also, Saito-san, could you please share a little bit more from your experience? What are some route to market mistakes? Yeah.
Okay, I think that maybe I can first start from the relatively large international brand. There are lots of stories around, and typically for international big brands, the ideal route to market for them is to set up their own subsidiary in the market, like Japan, and then they import, then they sell. They distribute, like Matsuo-san mentioned, the full operation. That's going to be the most profitable, of course, setup, if you are successful. And then, for example, in China, in Asia, or even in Taiwan, much smaller market in Japan, that's a lot of international brands are successful in setting up the subsidiary. Japan, despite its size of the market, it's quite difficult, for even for the large international brands. So that's the reason why that the large companies, even like Molson Coors in Canada, like from Canada, that also had a very quite tough time, setting up their own subsidiary. And then a lot of big brands are actually partnering with the big Japanese manufacturer, actually beer manufacturer mainly, like Kirin or Suntory. And then but when they do it, of course they are not quite satisfied. Maybe they come with a very high expectation because they are the international brand with a very strong local players. However, that those local companies are basically they are the brand owner by themselves. And then not just one brand, they have multiple brands by themselves already. And then also being the distributor of multiple international brands. So actually, you will soon realize that you are not really prioritized. If you go down to the sales branch level, they don't even know your brand well. So actually, the expectation that you set, during negotiation or during the deals, quite high. Reality is much lower. And then end up with a quite actually similar volume versus that you go through the smaller importers. Like Vincent mentioned, there are four kind of categories of importer. So there's a lot of stories of failures for international brands. But I think to be more relevant for today's today's audience, I think that for new entry, the craft brands or smaller brands, I think that the key thing that you set your expectations at the right level, and then you match your expectation with the target retailer. You match your expectation with the target route to market. I mean importer or distributor in this case, and then that's probably the I think the minimum thing that you have to do. And then take it from there, whether in order to expand, whether you do it with your own, I don't know, many very unique marketing assets, or the unique business model, etc. I think that's more creative, area, for the growth. But I think that to begin with, you have to set your expectation at the right level. I think that's very important, that to minimize the risk, for this particular, market.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And as you said, setting the right expectations and also choosing the right partners is very valuable. Also, whether you're going to start working with the largest supplier in Japan or largest distributor, or whether you would choose a little bit smaller partner that would really take care of your brand, is very important. So indeed, we need to be very realistic when entering the Japanese market, and also think about what would be your right route to market strategy. Thank you so much to both of you for those answers. And now, since we're talking about Alberta in Canada, I'd like to ask you, what is your opinion about the strength of Canadian products that can come to the Japanese market, and what are the opportunities for Alberta brands in the craft beer and spirit space? Maybe we can start with Saito-san this time.
Okay, all right. Well, I think, this is more like my personal opinion. I think, one option that you can consider is that, you don't try to do everything by yourself, by your own brands, you're just one brand. One example that I personally know well is that, there were more than 100, craft breweries from Scotland. And then Scotch whiskey is quite famous, all over the world, even in Japan. But Scottish craft beer is not, it's super small. No one knows in Japan. So rather that, they actually try to do it on their own brands. There were one companies, who actually tried to consolidate, the several craft beer brands from Scotland. So let's say, like, if there are more than 100 breweries, maybe 20, breweries, they are really, happy to participate in this kind of like, consolidation. And then actually they export together, through one entity. And then, they actually promote as a Scottish craft beer rather than, I'm brand X, I'm brand Y. So that, you can promote, Scotch whiskey, Scotch beer, rather than, they're promoting the brand that no one knows in Japan yet, right? And also you can also lower the burden, lower the hurdle, right? The volume, like, you don't have to be the full container. You can be maybe 1 or 2 pallets from each brand, but altogether you can consolidate into one container, for example, so that you can, of course, you can optimize your cost. So that's one idea that I just thought of. When I just think of Canadian brands or Canadian beer.
That's very interesting concept, and rather than competing with each other, work together as a team and also bring the products to Japan. Also, as you were describing, that could be very key in the shipment process, but also when negotiating with the local distributor. So thank you for sharing that example.
I don't know whether there's any leading craft breweries, or even the distributor in Canada who knows those craft beer brewery like you well. And then if there's anyone who is really taking the initiative to do that, probably I think that's also one way. Yeah,
very interesting. Thank you for sharing that examples, and I hope craft breweries in Alberta can also learn from it and potentially try to do it as a team too. How about Matsuno-san? What do you think are the opportunities for Canadian brands from Alberta to enter the Japanese market?
Yep. Well, Saito-san said a lot. So I'm just adding a little bit about from a spirits point of view. As you may all know, that the Canadian Club is distributed by Suntory, who's the giant of a spirits business in Japan. They've been promoting a lot about Canadian whiskey, although the volume growth is not there yet. But recently, the Japanese whiskey are short of stock. The Scotch whiskey as well, some of the single malts are having difficulty of supplying. So it's not the huge opportunity yet to the market. But if you look at Irish whiskey, which was really, really small in Japan in 15 years ago, but gradually thanks for the investment by Irish whiskey brands, it's growing. So if you look at the market for the mid to long term, there should be the opportunity. And if you can bear with the time, I think that opportunity is there.
Very interesting. And just one question from my side to build up on that. How about the gin as a category in Japan? Because in Alberta, there are quite a few companies that are developing gin. So how is the market landscape in Japan on that?
So craft gin has been the trend for in Japanese market for the last couple of years. And the brand has grown through the on-premise bartenders, on-premise consumers who've been the leader of the expanding the market of the craft gin. Unfortunately, the COVID situation have been impacting on-premise business, and it's been slowing the growth of craft gin. But still, the craft gin is one of the hot topics still in the market. As Saito-san mentioned, if you set the right target or right expectation, I think there is opportunity for craft gin as well.
Thank you very much for sharing that and giving us some insights about the market in Japan, and especially for spirits, and having those both insights from spirits and also craft beer is quite interesting. So if our viewers have any further questions on those two large categories in Japan, please let us know in the chat box. And for the next questions, I wanted to ask you and dig a little bit deeper on the key success factors when building a relationship with the Japanese distributors. We all know that there are those language barriers, cultural barriers. The distance is quite large between Canada and Japan. But what would you recommend for our Alberta companies to do when it comes to building a relationship, starting a relationship, and maintaining one? Maybe we can start with Matsuno-san.
Okay. Yes. Sorry. Well, I had an experience of working with the major companies like Suntory, Asahi, as a distributor, and also smaller scale distributors as well. The first thing that makes it difficult for people who's outside of Japan is to understand Japanese culture and Japanese business meeting manners. Of course, as you mentioned, there is the language barrier. The most of the time you need to use the translator in the meeting, and it takes twice the time as more than you expected. And also there is a very different culture background to the Japanese companies. There are people who, there are a tendency of Japanese companies who said yes in the meeting, but day after they said, well, it's just nodding is understanding. It's not yes, we do it. So those minor things, but there are a lot of different culture, behavior differences between the Japanese culture to the surely Canadian culture. So that's the one big challenge, and you need to understand that to work with the Japanese distributor.
Mm-hmm. And once it comes to building the trust with the Japanese partner, what would you say would be the key element for that?
Trust. Well, you have to meet them. Of course, it's difficult now, but once this is over, you have to talk with them. You have to meet them. You have to eating together, drinking together. It's very traditional, but it works still.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And Saito-san, what are your thoughts on building a relationship with Japanese partners?
Yeah. So it's like Vincent also presented. Actually, there are not so many options in terms of importing beverage alcohol in Japan. Maybe I think. Let's say maybe 20 max, maybe less than that. The list is not that long in the first place. There are other options in the four kind of like four options, like work directly with the retailer, and in that case, that basically they are kind of their job is actually to select and then negotiate with those import brands. So probably you may not find it very difficult to at least negotiate with them. Of course, the terms, of course, it's really up to your category, up to your brands. So I think back to the Matsuno-san's point on to have the more efficient kind of like communication with the potential distributor. I think that the easiest way is to screen out those companies who you may not be able to communicate, or who you may not be able to work with, right? Maybe through like Megan, through Mary Beth, or through you, Paulina, that you can give. I think that generic advice will be enough. That this company is famous for this, this owner has the tendency of this kind of I think information is very important actually to not to waste your time. And then you can at least minimize those communication or cultural the gap issue, and then you can get to the business probably in a more higher likability.
Yeah. I understand. And just to add up a little bit on that point, from your point of view, what is the best advice you would give in order to build this trust with the local partners?
So your question is, sorry, Paulina?
My question is, so when it comes to building the trust, or in a little bit longer term, what would be your advice to do so?
Oh, okay. I think that time matters. You can say you can write a document, you can sign a contract, but typically that when it's there's a lots of cases that the one Japanese importer has been distributing, importing the brands for 30 years or 50 years or even over that. That's quite rare for example, in the country like China, right? The business turnover in terms of generations, in terms of ownership, it's so fast. And then Japan, is quite, I would say, in long term. And then maybe not very clear. It may not be very clear when you actually negotiate in the first place and sign the contract. But over times, that how they behave, or how you behave, what you do, what they do, actually that matters. And then it's very, very, very long-term relationship culture. Yeah, and then it's not necessarily verbal. It not necessarily be very committed in the first place. But you will know, you will figure out, whether this guy is, it's really trustful. Yeah.
I see. Thank you so much for those advices. And I definitely understand also from our experience with clients that understanding the culture, thinking a little bit longer term rather than looking after quick results is very crucial to build the trust and also to have a long-term relationship. So thank you so much for your advices. And we're moving forward towards the last question. Just before that, I heard from Mary Beth that there is an issue with the chat box, but now everybody should be able to use it. So please, apologies for that error. So you can text now in the chat box. Thank you. And to move forward to the last questions, what are the emerging opportunities for international craft beer and spirits brands in Japan? Are there some new trends that are coming up after the COVID, or something that is quite recent? We'll be very curious to hear about that. So maybe we can start with Saito-san again this time. Could you please maybe cover the craft beer and any other category that you think is worth mentioning?
Okay. Well, probably it may not be very specific to Japan only, but the market, especially that on trade, is I believe it's still quite slow in Japan. So actually, it's really opening up. We talk about what's going to happen when we really open up, etc. But I think the overall that because the market share of those craft beer brands, or probably even craft spirits brand, is small, means that it's underrepresented in Japan market compared with, I would say, maybe like to Australia, not to mention Japan, US or Canada, but Australia, or maybe even other Asian markets. So in the long term, there should be opportunity to grow, not necessarily very fast. Don't know how fast, after the COVID. But I think that the trend of expansion of those premium niche craft brands, I think will continue. Probably, and then probably e-commerce will be even more and more important in Japan as well. So there will be more, I would say, space, for the smaller brands to enter and then to be distributed, and then to be more easy to shop, from consumers' point of view in the long term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I just hope those trends really develop and take place, so more players in the market are able to enter the market and also have access to the Japanese consumer. And how about Matsuno-san? What do you think are some opportunities that are emerging here in Japan?
Well, I kind of agree with the Saito-san. He covers most of the market. So again, there should be opportunity, not like tomorrow, but mid to long term. And the Japanese people, the trend setting of Japanese culture is changing year to year. It used to be there is a big wave coming in, everybody follows. But now small waves, bits and pieces all over the places, and niche market is becoming a bit bigger niche. And going back to cocktails or spirits, there are people who's looking into new things for them. So Saito mentioned not like short term, but for the mid to long term, there should be opportunity. And I saw many comments in like mocktails. Well, that's one thing which is growing in the last years in Japan. There are people who wants to have more, try to have new things, and especially like SNS is helping niche things to grow in Japan. Bartenders, mixologists, they approach to same category people outside of Japan easily by chatting or tweeting or Instagram. So yes, I believe there should be opportunity in the future.
Yeah. Thank you so much for mentioning that. And indeed, the social media channels here are growing and are contributing to new trends entering the market. A lot of international influences coming into Japan these days as well. So we're looking at an exciting and let's say dynamic market, although we should be expecting a little bit mid to longer term changes and opportunities. So also thank you for mentioning the comments. So I'd like to invite also Vincent to join our panelists so we can move towards the Q&A section. So just, okay, so now we have 3 of you and we'd like to move forward to the questions. So I have a lot of questions going on. So I would like to kick it off with the first one. Are there any opportunities to work with Japanese distilleries as contract manufacturers? Or what is your opinion about collaboration with local partners in terms of production? Maybe we can kick it off with Saito-san.
Distilleries, right?
Like,
distilleries, right?
Local,
craft distilleries.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Maybe I think Matsuno-san, you can take it. Yeah, first.
Yes. Okay, Paulina, is it okay for me to just take
Yes, of course. Please jump in, and if
Sure.
you'd like to contribute to the conversation, please feel free to do so.
I think the answer is yes. There are a lot of distilleries, even for local spirits, sake, shochus, plum wines, and whiskeys as well. And also there are independent bottlers as well in Japan. So if you think about, if you're specific into, just mentioned here, like old-fashioned Manhattan, it's possible. But the important thing is it's not cheap, to be honest. So there are pros and cons, of course, on working with the local distillers. But yes, the answer is yes.
All right. And just to build on this, so now we just talk about distilleries. But Saito-san, if you think about more RTDs or local breweries, What do you think about that?
RTDs is, I think, for sure, because even the major brands, they like Kirin or Suntory, they even use the co-packer in Japan. So those, co-packer with the alcohol, license, what they typically do is that, probably they source the alcohol and then mix with the ingredients. So unless you have some particular ingredient that should be imported from Alberta, Canada, for example, then you have to you have to be, you have to take care of that sourcing. But otherwise, that if you if you have a brand and recipe, and then I think they can do it. I think there are numerous different types of RTD flavors already in the market. Japan is one of the largest market for RTD alcohol beverage, and then it's been in the market for nearly 20 years. So I think that there are a lot of it's possible, for RTD. In terms of breweries, contract breweries or co-packing, Vincent, do you have any idea?
I think it's quite limited.
The capacity,
No, I think it's quite limited. What is interesting is that there are some kind of collaboration between non-Japanese and Japanese breweries where they do a double basically edition. One is made in the other country, one is made in Japan, and then they kind of import-export in both sides. That could be also a cool way to enter the Japanese market, collaborating with another brewery in Japan, without having to basically outsource the production itself. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your answers. And I think we have a very complete pictures of all categories that we have present today. I'd like to move to another category that have been mentioned quite some time. So it's about the cocktails, ready-to-drink cocktails and mocktails. So what is your opinion about the current trends on the market, and are there any developments in that category locally? Whoever would like to contribute can go ahead.
Maybe I can jump in.
Yes, please go ahead.
No, so interestingly, also on Gourmet Pro side, we have also a market intelligence activity, and we have a newsletter named Market Check, which is a free newsletter that everyone also can find online. We've been going through this non-alcohol beverage trend a few months ago, and it was interesting to see that there are very rapid move when it's come to, for example, non-alcoholic wine in terms of category. The non-alcoholic beer is a category that exists for a long time in Japan, where basically it's mostly domestic category. As for the mocktails, this is something that is happening at the moment. We don't see the same kind of trends as in other markets at the moment, to be honest, in Japan. But there is this interest, coming also from the COVID-19 situation, where people are at home, wanted to kind of break the routine with something new, something else, but they also care about their health, and they also care about their, alcohol intake. So there might be a market in terms of big consumer trends, but at the moment there is no category. Also because there are not so much people, playing in this category. In the ready to drink, there are 1-2 brands. What is interesting is that Coca-Cola launched a zero alcohol, what is called a lemon sour, which is basically a lemon taste, ready to drink. I think last week or 2 weeks ago. So you see, it feels like there is something happening, but the category is still very small at the moment, and it's going to be difficult for non-Japanese brand to enter at this stage, but probably there will be opportunities with the mocktails in 1 year, 2 years from now, for sure.
To build on what Vincent just mentioned, I think that the mocktails, it's a yes, there's no category yet. That means that there's no established brand, meaning that I think that I think there is opportunity, and then it's going to be very dynamic. And then since it's not an established category, some kind of retailer chain or discount store chain, so it's very keen on catching up that kind of new trend. Well, even though it's not a trend yet, but they're going to be the very early picker of those kind of opportunities. And then I think that's going to be very interesting. You have no major established competitors brands in the market, unlike beer or spirits. I think that's very interesting. Now when we talk about the RTD, cocktail, alcohol cocktail, ready to drink, I think it's another story. I think it's super competitive, I would say. Because when you are in a can, ready to drink, typically the 12 ounce size can that you're already in the massive category called RTD, and then there are huge hundreds, thousands of new products are launched by domestic brands only every year. So actually to get on the shelf will be super difficult. That's my opinion. So I think that non-alcoholic mocktail has more opportunity. That's my opinion. Yeah.
And just to bring a follow-up question, maybe also for Matsuno-san, what do you think about non-alcohol spirits? We know the category is still quite small in Japan, but what are some emerging trends or opportunities for that segment?
The mocktails are still, like everybody's mentioned, it's still on just started happening in market. But if you talk with the bartenders in Japan, everybody knows how to make mocktails. They have been serving mocktails to the consumers, because there are people who want to go to bar but not able to drink a lot, and then ask for the mocktails. So if it's just a matter of when I think that would happen. Of course, surely, as I mentioned, COVID-19 has been pushing back the on-premise business. But once it's open again, it's not. I don't think it's going to be a major mainstream. But the health conscious and all that coming in together, I think mocktail have an opportunity in market.
Thank you so much for adding on that. And I have another follow-up for that category as well. It's a very interesting question, talking about like RTD kombucha. So that's a little bit a different category. So there's some ABV in there. It's quite complex. So I wanted to just slightly touch that topic. Sorry. So what is your opinion on the category in Japan?
Who's star? Am I star? Am I taking the first one?
Whoever would
sure,
like to contribute.
I can do that. Well, kombucha is, to be honest, I think that's really difficult. We don't have the culture of even drinking pure, simple kombucha without alcohol. It's like China, they use a lot of green teas and for mixing cocktails. But in Japan, it's not the way we drink. So my personal opinion is going to be very difficult.
You mean even for cocktail mixer?
It is, yeah. I think it's difficult. Yeah.
Vincent?
No, I agree with the comment. I think there might be a small market within the expat, communities in Japan. But so far, it has been a very tough. I think like some companies tried actually. I kind of heard that, but they didn't even succeed to motivate an importer to do that. So probably yes, it's a little bit too early at the moment. Yes, in terms of category. Also, we are not going to explain this because it will take a long time. But the kombucha name itself is confusing in Japan because there is another Japanese category named kombucha, etc., etc. So. It's going to be quite difficult probably to do that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the answers. It's indeed quite an interesting and complex topic and category here in Japan. And to move to the next question, the question is more focused on craft beer, but I'd like to expand it a little bit more on all categories. So what do you think, do you think seasonality is an important point when it comes to the craft beer and spirits in Japan? Seasonings and seasonality.
Okay, all right. So two things. One is that in terms of seasonality, in terms of volume, yes, there exists. But how you can reflect that into your into your production plan, into your export, import plan. I think it's another thing. Yes, there probably, I would say, in the peak month and then in the lowest months, probably the gap is about double. So when you ship, one container, one pallet, of course, that's going to be affected. But I think that that kind of seasonality can be. I think your importer will understand it, and then they will try to adjust as much as possible. So now I talk about another seasonality, like it's seasonal flavor. I think that's one, of course, one way actually to approach. Not necessarily like one signature flavor, one signature beer all through the year. Of course, that's of course most ideal. But like on some opportunities, some specific very Canada the relevant timing, and then very Canadian flavor, unique flavor, which other beer doesn't have, and then just to aim at one season, 1 month, or several weeks. That's also another kind of like another unique approach, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you so much for covering both. So how about Matsuno-san? Do you have any points to add on that?
Not much, but yes, like Saito mentioned, there is a volume difference in the seasonalities. Christmas season, the springs, and the summer cocktails are not much drunk because of the beer coming into the market. For the cocktail wise, yes, there have been limited editions launched using like cherry blossom flavors or like citrus flavors. But once it's come to the market, it kind of becomes the stable SKU in market. So not much on the details, but like Saito-san mentioned, volume-wise, there are trends based on the seasons.
Thank you for that. And talking about the volume, when you start business or trading with Japan, could you please set up a realistic expectation for our viewers? What would be like expected volume for the first several shipments, or how do they start in terms of volume for both craft beers and spirits?
Yeah, Saito-san, please.
Please.
Okay.
No, go ahead, please.
Okay, I go. I think, like Saito-san mentioned, it's not going to be a huge first shipment happening in Japan. But if I look at only for spirit side, it doesn't have the before what do you call it? Before date, like 12 months.
Best before date.
Yes, best before date. So spirit, yes, you can ship it in, but once you ship it in a heavy volume, then you may not be able to expect the next shipment until like a couple years later. So it really depends on how you deal with the local importer. Importers tend not to have a big shipment at a big stock at their warehouse. So I thought it's really pure good idea of combining a couple brands together, putting into one container and shipping into Japan. Together with one importer will be a nice idea to start the business with. You don't need to stay with them forever. You can start looking for another partner after a couple of years. But if you wanted to start and make it easy, is to probably work together as a team and coming into Japan.
Thank you for that. Thank you for answering those questions. And I want to switch a little bit more towards the pricing structure when it comes to importing to Japan. As I understood from our co-organizers from Alberta, there are quite a few wholesalers from Alberta that are ready to sell in Japan. So we'd like to ask one of their questions. So that's towards Vincent, the question, but also please feel free to contribute. So from the price structure that we showed previously, more specifically for the craft beer, the wholesaler margin only receives 12 to 15% of the margin. So there is no section specifically indicated for advertising, customs, shipping fees as overall expenses. So who is responsible for all those expenses, those additional expenses that are important for the advertising, for example, or the shipping fees? So is it the importer? Is it the wholesaler? Is it the retailer? Can we please talk a little bit more in detail about that?
Yes, so basically, like when it's come to the import cost, this is going to be bear by of course, by the importer. The logistic cost, usually the importer is shipping, a few cases, typically like 3 case, 5 case to a wholesaler warehouse. This is going to be bear by the importer. And then there is also some logistic cost, bear by the wholesaler, which is included in the 12-15 margin, which is like a gross margin. Their actual margin is actually like 1-2%. Most of the costs are basically logistic costs. And for example, the wholesaler will also pay for the center fees, the storage fees, etc. So this is part of their 12%, 15% basically gross margin. What is interesting is that, and actually this is also related to the previous question, the storage fee are increasing a lot in Japan. This is also the reason why, the importer prefer to buy like 1 pallet, 2 pallets, even if they have to pay a higher import cost to save some money on the storage side. The current situation around the storage fees basically implies that most of the wholesalers, the bar suppliers, they don't want to deal with inventory at all. So this is also why they will push the importer to be able to ship like even sometimes 1 case. When you start a new brand, actually that's one of the barriers, because some of the bars, they would like to buy 1 bottle, and it's going to be difficult to execute. Then when it's come to the marketing expense, I think like here there are lots of different schemes possible. Sometimes the importer is going to spend the money in marketing, but usually the importers, as I explained, they are not really strong in purely brand marketing activities. So the marketing they are going to do is more like a trade show, some kind of like a brochure, trade marketing activities. What often happens is that, as in the other market, is that there is AMP, agreement where the exporter and the importer are sharing like 50% of each of the costs, for example. And there is a marketing plan which is agreed together to basically where the importer is likely to cover more the sales, let's say the sales expense, more like the sales condition, for example, possibly listing fees, rebates, and then the importer is going to take care of more like purely brand marketing activities, which could be, again, very simple things in terms of having the right, brand material, brochure, the website, for example. This is often the way they will share the cost, actually. The marketing expense could be very different. When you launch a product, that can be 100%, the equivalent of 100% of the sales. If you think about like more running business, I think like most of the companies are spending like 10 to 15% in marketing in the first year, and maybe in the future they're going to spend like 5 to 10% in marketing. What do you think, Matsuno-san and Saito-san, around the numbers? I think it's good also that the question was about the price structure. How much percentage should the exporter expect in terms of marketing expense?
I think this is really case by case, So typically, in your negotiation, price negotiation or trading term negotiation with the importer, I think that they probably already have they negotiated or they had dealt with some other brands in the past. So typically that you probably can speak common language. If you open a spreadsheet in between you and then the importer, and then you talk about this is the X factory cost, this is the logistic cost, and then these are kind of like I think it's clear. But when it comes to advertising, I think it's always very tricky, right? So, Vincent, because they can ask for more advertising, but it's hard for brand exporter to track how the marketing budget really was used or paid. And then it's very stressful to actually to track the evidence of the marketing expense, etc. So I think this is really depends on your negotiation, how you work with the importer. So because whatever you say, during the negotiation stage, I think that marketing expense is very quite theoretical, hypothetical, right? Because when you say 10% or 15%, but you don't even know how many bottles or how many cakes you can sell, right? So it's not a simple percentage, unlike logistics. So I think really, I think this kind of thing is in the real negotiation state that probably probably there are resources that you can actually consult with, I think.
I just want to add some comments. I think when you talk about pricing, it's really complicated, and like Saito-san and Vincent mentioned, it's really difficult to track what has been used, and also in coming into details when distributor want to importer distributor wanted to use their MP or marketing expense from their margin. You may not be able to control the quality of the message that they are sending out to the market. So it's really difficult. If you're pushing for the volume, they might use it as like just simple rebate to the trade, and they call it like marketing. You get the volume, but 5 years later, you see your brand has no brand images, etc. It's just price-driven volume. If you think about pure marketing needs to be done, and you guide them to activate how to do the marketing, you can do the satisfactory marketing activities, but the volume might not come in the short-term period. So there is the expectation that you need to clearly set in the first place what you want to do. You want to go for volume for the first couple of years, then do the brands. You might want to do that. Or vice versa. So it really depends on how you want to set the target.
Thank you so much for this really full explanation around the pricing. And we have only 2 minutes left, so really quick last question. So we know that in the past, like very, very recently, Mosan Course were stopped their operations here in Japan, even though it's a very large company. So when you think about a little bit smaller players and like smaller companies from abroad wanting to come to Japan, would you give them a final advice on what they should pay attention the most in terms of strategy and marketing in order to be successful in Japan? Any final words?
Fine.
Okay, so go ahead, please.
Yeah. Find partner who can trust.
All right, thank you.
From me, I think set the right expectation. Everything starts from expectation, right? And then your expectation means that your volume capacity, your expectation, how much of your product you want to be exported, you want to be exported to Japan, and I think that everything starts from there. Yeah.
Thank you. And Vincent?
Same as Saito-san, I think like start from small volume. Why not having 1 pallet, 2 pallets, a limited edition seasonal product, one shot, and from then you learn, about the market in terms of investment. That was also the question, I think. Why not starting with 10,000, 20,000 Canadian dollar and just like try to build some awareness to a very niche channel, like as the cocktail bars, for example, as a start. I think like small is the best to approach the Japanese market and really try and learn together with the importer.
Thank you so much for all the answers. So to just quickly summarize, find the right partner, set the right expectations, and start small so you can justify your investment on the market. Thank you so much for all the speakers. I really appreciate your input and time, and I hope our viewers were able to get some valuable insights to contribute to their business expansion to Japan. And I'd just like to invite also Mary Beth to say some final words and conclude our webinar for today.
Thank you very much. Really, first of all, I'd like to thank both Saito-san and Matsuno-san. I don't think that people have access to people like yourselves very often. And even for myself, after being in the market so long, I really learned a great deal. So thank you very much. I have to add that they weren't the only thing I would add is that when you're building your relationship with the people in Japan, be on time. If you say you're going to answer the question, be on time. And it doesn't mean Alberta time. It means if you say Friday, it's Japan Friday, not Alberta Friday. So I can't help myself on that. But I also want to thank our teammates from Gourmet Pro. It's an excellent example of what we have true experts here. Obviously, I'm really happy to help you in the market. But if some of you are ready to go to, onto I would invite you and welcome you to contact them directly and see if there's a way that they can help you. For my part, I do try very hard to find business connections, and I will be out at trade shows. And I have excellent partners with the Embassy of Canada in Japan, and we access the Trade Commissioner services there as well, and we can work together that way. And finally, I wanted to mention that if your questions were not answered in the chat, it doesn't mean that we're ignoring it. It just means it was very limited time. So Megan and I will get back to you on those questions, and feel free to poke us if we don't. But I do want to finally thank my home office team in Alberta. Alberta Agriculture has a lot of resources, so please do start there. And sometimes when you start there with Megan, for example, she would support us in Korea or the US or other key markets. So I want to thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, Paulina.
Thank you so much for everyone's time. Thank you, Mary Beth, as well. Thank you, the whole Alberta team, for co-organizing this event. And I hope if everybody has any questions or would like to further connect, please let us know. Also, make sure you contact the Alberta office as well as us if you need any support. Thank you for your time and have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody.